Hope everybody is doing well. It is a Friday afternoon here in Durham, North Carolina. And of course, a lot of folks are getting excited about the fact that there is a Hayti Heritage Film Festival going on. So that is one of the things that is taking place in Durham. So a lot of people are being very excited about that. I think they showed a film yesterday that was the opening film about Little Richard. And definitely later on, there will be films dealing with Princeville. And of course, there have been films already going on. As a matter of fact, I think at around 2 o'clock, they'll be having a discussion with some young filmmakers, including my good friend Landon Boss, and all along those lines. So definitely there's a lot of things taking place in that sense. And of course, folks are enjoying the spring-like weather, even though I think it might be 5 degrees cooler than it was yesterday. But it's definitely spring-like as we are in early March and didn't have that much of a winter and all along those lines. So it didn't get blisterly cold or nothing like that. But you got some folks that are wondering if climate change is real. But definitely it looks like the whole groundhog was right since he predicted an early spring, and it looks like we've got an early spring. But then again, I never put anything past the winter weather and old man winter, so they may decide to pop in and give us another cold blast at some point or another. But as it is March 8th, I'm hoping that is not the case, but one never knows in that kind of way. But I'm going to bring in Dr. Michelle. Let's see what she's got going on in her life and all along those lines, because definitely it is great seeing folks doing amazing things in the world and all in that kind of space. So like I said, I was doing all kinds of things yesterday, including watching both the President's State of the Union as well as the counter argument from the Republican side and all in that way. So definitely I spent some time doing that on yesterday. And then of course got a chance to watch a little bit, even though I didn't watch it at the venue of the Little Richard movie, as I went ahead and got it from, I believe, Amazon, and I will watch it in its entirety at some point or another, since he seemed like he was a fascinating character when he was around and doing all of his amazing music and all in that space. But definitely that will be interesting to watch and to see how that goes in that way. But definitely I know a lot of things are happening. And like I said, I'm enjoying the better weather that we're having here in Durham, North Carolina. And like I said, there are still some places that are getting hit by hard weather. I know there are places that are still getting like some snow, even though that's something we didn't have to. I don't think we had any snow this particular winter, as I can recall, and everything. And then there are folks that are dealing with forest fires in California and other kinds of weather. So I don't know where it is where you are, but we're actually enjoying the weather here in Durham, North Carolina. And like I said, a lot of folks are getting out and about. It's springtime, which means that it's also festival time, not just inside festivals like the film festival. But I know last week, or maybe it was a week and a half ago, there was the Nevermore Festival, which was held at the Carolina Theater, which was for those folks that like horror and fantasy movies. And some of those I like, some of those I'm not a big fan of, because Carrie scared the heck out of me, as did The Exorcist and The Omen with the whole twisting head and all along those lines. So the horror films, I'm not that big a fan of, but the fantasy and some of the kind of like what the future might look like, futuristic films, I can get with that. And like I said, I've judged that contest, I think, for 3 or 4 years now. But sometimes I'm going like, yeah, I think I'll pass on the really hard stuff. And when it gets really hard, then I might be a little bit of a wimp. And yes, I can be man enough to admit that I can be a wimp sometimes as well, and not want to deal with the harshness of some of the hard films and all along those lines. But Dr. Michelle, if you'll share a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into this conversation. But how are you doing, and how is the weather treating you?
Hi. Yeah, it's a beautiful day in New York today.
Oh,
Sunshine. So happy. And the weather is very pleasant and gentle. No more rain, but I think rain's returning tomorrow. Yuck. Um we need our plants fed, so I guess it's a good thing.
that could
Um
be that could be
yeah.
a very good thing and everything. I remember that definitely in New York, friends of mine have told me that I have a way back when I used to visit New York a couple of times. They're like, Mark, you have a New York personality. And I never knew what a New York personality was. And I still don't know, because I'm kind of like, I don't know that I have a New York personality. I think that I have a very Southern personality. But some folks are like, yeah, you have like a New York personality. And I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean I'm overly direct, which I don't think I am, or what that actually means? But I do remember that a
Is that
friend
our
of mine.
reputation? Is that our reputation that we're overly direct?
Well, that can be a reputation sometimes, that New Yorkers can be overly direct. And of course, there's always that reputation of rush, 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 and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. And then, of course,
Yeah.
during the pandemic, we had folks that slowed down in that space and everything. So definitely, even in the New York area, I know a lot of folks that were still in their houses and weren't or their apartments or lofts and weren't necessarily getting around as much. But as we apparently are out of that pandemic, or at least that's what they say and everything, maybe folks are getting back to get it out and about. I know that one of the founders of the network just said he came back from New York where he had gone to a Broadway play, and he was actually praising the Broadway play for their security, because he was talking about how you can't even go into a Broadway play without getting, I guess, wanded and making sure that you don't have things that you're not supposed to have on you and all along those lines. So,
Yes. Yes. So I think maybe you do talk quickly. So maybe
maybe that's what it is.
I think it is, because I'm like, huh? What did he say? Okay. So I have a private practice in Harrison, New York. I'm co-founder and clinical director of Through My Eyes, which is a nonprofit. It offers free clinically guided videotaping for chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave a video legacy for their children and loved ones. I teach a graduate course at NYU in mindfulness, which I love. I am a member of the American Red Cross Crisis Team, and then I also serve on the board of directors of the Westchester Trauma Network. So I do a lot of trauma work. And then I have 2 books, which are very exciting. One is called, let's see where it is. There it is. Okay. It's called Free Your Child from Overeating. 53 Mind Body Strategies for Lifelong Health. There it is. Whoops. And it's a handbook for helping kids and teens. And then my new book, which is so exciting, is Ace Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self, and Live the Life You Want. And ACE stands for Acceptance, Compassion, and Empowerment. And I just finished doing the audiobook, which I'm so excited. I narrated it myself, which was a task and a half. But it will be out in the spring. So I'm so excited about that. And then I am a Psychology Today blogger. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I offer new guided meditations every Thursday morning at 11 a.m.
Oh, wow.
So that is me.
It sounds like a lot. It sounds like some great things that you are doing in that space and all along those lines. You mentioned this notion because actually one of the things that the kids are doing, because the same place that is doing the film festival has a program called the Summer it's got arts intensive in the title, so I'm trying to remember the full name and everything, because it's not the summer arts intensive, but it is definitely SAI and all in that way. But one youth arts intensive, that's what it's called. But definitely one of the things that they have been doing is they've been having the kids learn how to document their loved ones and to kind of like get their ancestral history, for lack of a better term, and everything in that way. Because there's actually a gentleman, Earl Imes, that has been teaching them about how to do those interviews and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, were you one of those kids who you were growing up, were listening to your elders and were learning from your elders and maybe even asking them pertinent questions and documenting them, or is this something that came up in your life later? Because you mentioned this.
So I'm going to say 2 influences. One is I have 4 grandparents, unfortunately, who passed away in the past 8 years, but who were all Holocaust survivors.
Wow.
Yeah, and they unfortunately, witnessed and experienced tremendous amount of trauma. Most of their family members were murdered, in gas chambers and concentration camps, and really horrible, horrible stuff. So one of my grandmothers in particular was very, very expressive and verbal about her trauma. And since I was a little girl, literally, she used to tell stories and stories about the war. So I was hearing those stories documented since I was little. I didn't understand them. And I only got to really appreciate, I guess, her suffering and their suffering in general, my grandparents' suffering, only as an adult. I really didn't get it, and I think even, and again, I totally influenced, obviously, the field of practice that I decided to go into. Here we are. Right. And the other grandparents were considerably traumatized. One grandfather wouldn't talk about it at all. He was, repressed a lot of feelings and had a really, really hard time. And then, years later, I was at the gym, and a woman approached me, and she used to tell me about her daughter. She had one daughter who was 9 at the time, and she told me that she was experiencing, unfortunately, her second bout of breast cancer. And she used to talk about how, like, her daughter was a miracle because she ended up getting pregnant after her first bout of breast cancer, which they told her she was not going to be able to conceive and have children. So she considered her child, a miracle child. And then when she had her second bout, unfortunately, of breast cancer, she, was terminal and she ended up dying. But when she was going through the process, her journey, she approached me and she said to me, "Could you help me? I really want to do a videotape for my daughter before I die. And I know because of your clinical expertise, and I'd really love to pick your brain and think about questions to ask, while I videotape." Anyway, a friend and myself decided to do some research to find out if there was any way that she could get videotaped. So they offered it at the hospital, but number one, you had to ask for it. Number two, you had to pay, a considerable amount of money. Number three, it was done at the hospital, and then you just spoke directly into the camera. So for all of those reasons, I decided to start this because I felt like, especially when you're going through, a very challenging situation like that, finances, obviously you're spending a lot of money on your healthcare. So I didn't feel like incurring another additional expense was fair or just. And then two, I felt like it should be done in the comfort of her home or somewhere that's a little bit more, friendly, engaging, etc. And then third is I felt like she should have some support while she's videotaping, whether somebody being there with her, somebody supporting her through the process, who understands a little bit more about, the challenges that she's going through. So for all those reasons, I decided to start this nonprofit because it addresses all of those key components that I found really, really, troubling to me. And we have videotaped over 300 individuals at this point, and I always get incredible feedback from families. Sorry about the noise. I always get incredible families who are so thankful and have such gratitude for the process. Both it's therapeutic because they're able to really talk about their life. They're able to leave this video legacy. And also the families just to have something concrete, and most of the time we have letters or we have cards or we have pictures, but we don't have a voice. We don't have a voice that goes along with it and a message. Because many people want to leave a legacy. They want to leave their message. So I'll ask questions like, when your child walks down the aisle, if they ever do, what kind of message would you want to send to them? Or if they're graduating from high school, what would you want to say to them? And these are things that you ordinarily wouldn't tap into.
Yeah, definitely not tap into those. And it's something that a lot of times people like to avoid because there is no doubt that just like we are born, there is a end date. And as a friend of mine likes to put it, we all know our birth date. None of us, except for the forces above, meaning God or God forces, depending on your religious beliefs and everything along those lines, that knows the end date or the expiration date. So my good friend Ray Pascal says, we all know our birth date, but none of us know our expiration date, and all we can do is try to live the best life that we can. But I know a lot of times people are very have an avoidance, and I like to get into that part of the conversation with you as well about things that we know are going to inevitably happen because we have not invented that ability to have kind of like that live forever pill, and I'm not sure that anybody necessarily would want that, even if it was around, because unless you're going to carry all your people with you, then you might be lost kind of in that Rip Van Winkle kind of situation and all in that way. But I just wondering, the people that you have recorded, are they all pretty much in the New York area, or are they global? And how does one learn about the information?
So good question, which brings me to a little bit of a challenge that I'm having. So the wonderful thing about the platform is I could do it literally internationally, nationally, etc. It was initially done where we would actually go to their home. So it was very local. But because of COVID and, the change in technology, I was able to do it nationally. And I was reaching people literally in rural areas. I videotaped a woman who had 7 children, did not have any financial means at all. She didn't even have internet.
Wow.
She went to videotape by her doctor's office. That's how she videotaped because she didn't even have access. So which is wonderful because again, I offer it as a free service, to people who wouldn't readily have access to this. So I am really trying to get some funding because I really want to develop. I have, a platform, but I really need to market and I need a platform. So I am looking to partner actually with anybody who's interested because it could be, and it is supposed to be a national endeavor.
Yes.
Yeah, and like I said, it is, it works seamlessly, even online. And people have been so, thankful. It's been so helpful for them.
Now, how are you doing in terms? Because I mentioned the film festival we got, and like I said, Landon is a friend of mine. I know a number of other filmmakers as well. So, are you using professional videographers and filmmakers, or are you just kind of having them do it on their own, or doing it like you said through Zoom, or how is it being recorded? These documents.
So right now it's being done by Zoom, but I actually built out a platform that's online, but again, it needs funding in order to be created and developed. Yes. And my dream eventually is to actually do a documentary because I love documentaries, but eventually I have a lot of footage, but eventually I do want to do a documentary because I really do want to contribute to the field practice of palliative care. What do people want? What do people need? What do people, strive for in their moments of death, right? Because the more that we know about how we could be helpful to people who are dying is knowing how we can be helpful to people who are alive, right? Like, what are the regrets of the dying, and even just the process whereby somebody's able to share about their life, so I hear the intricate details of people's life, their traditions, their values, what they connect to, what's meaningful to them. And all of those things are important, for palliative care,
Right.
to help people who are in that process.
And I imagine that you're probably learning different things about different people's cares and all along those lines. My dad has been having a long time relationship. As a matter of fact, they've been together longer than he was with my mother and everything. With and it sounds like you have some of this background in yourself as well. But a Jewish lady that was originally from New York and very much of a dance critic and a dancer herself. But like I said, my dad and Linda have been together for, I want to say, probably close to 20, 25 years, if not longer, and all in that space. But I do know that some cultures have different views about how they even deal with death, and I'm sure that that's even come up in some of your ways of the conversations, because I do know that I have friends that are of Muslim background, and I know that they sometimes do like a whole washing kind of tradition that not a lot of other religions do, and all in that space. But I'm sure that some of those conversations have come up in your discussions as well.
Most everything comes up because you talk, because I ask questions. I actually formulated a questionnaire of over 200 questions. Yeah, that I ask people. Again, we don't go over all the 200 questions because that's way too much, but I customize each questionnaire for the person, which is amazing too. So they get to kind of decide, and which is kind of part of the empowering process and advocacy and efficacy, right, of a person who's in that space. They get to decide what they want to talk about, from A to Z, so I developed all these questions where they really have carte blanche. They could decide what they want to talk about. Yes, people, you'd be surprised. People talk about their traditions. They talk about their spirituality. They talk about anything from A to Z. So I get to learn a lot about different cultures, which I appreciate so much because I really value people. I think every person is worthy and whole, every person across the board. So for me, it's just so beautiful to hear of people's connections, to things that are meaningful to them. So that definitely comes up. And, the other thing too is the process by which I videotape varies from person to person, which is fascinating. So like I had a person who said to me, you know what? I want to just talk into the camera and talk directly to specific people in my life. I was like, okay, right. And that was, again, what was meaningful to them. I have other people who want to do the videotaping with a family member present.
Good.
Right? I have some people who completely want to be alone. They want to do it solo. They don't want anybody there. They want it to be private. So it's so interesting also the way people decide, to speak, even the emotionality connected to it. Some people, keep it a little bit kind of on the surface. They say to me, I don't want to cry. I don't want to get too deep. Totally respect where they're at. Some people are a lot more emotive and expressive. So again, it really varies from person to person.
Yeah, it definitely varies from person to person and everything. And like I said earlier, I know that a lot of times when you are born and then you are in your youth, a lot of times people, particularly in their youth, even though there have been tragedies, we know what happened to that Georgia student and a number of other things that people have been taken out away from life much earlier than need be. As a matter of fact, on our news show here on the network yesterday, we had a young lady that she was the mother of one of the victims from the Parkland shooting, but she has turned that tragedy around and has now got a organization called Save Our Youth that is trying to make sure that the youth are actually in safe environments in the various schools around the nation and everything. But the long and short of what I'm here to ask is a lot of times when we were young, we don't want to think about the fact that the end is going to be there. There is a finite number of days that we are here on this earth, and we may not know what that finite number is and everything. But there, like I said, as far as I know, nobody has come up with that immorality, not immorality, but the morality pill or the mortality pill. That's the word I was looking for. The mortality
Yeah.
pill that would keep them alive and all along those lines and everything. So I was just wondering your thoughts as to at what point were you comfortable having these conversations and even conversations with others? Because I know even myself
Yeah.
as a youngster, we sometimes were like, yeah, because I jokingly say, and only partially jokingly, that I would love to live to, and I said it several times on this show, on the online dinner party, would love to be, to make it to 200. Nobody's done it unless you believe some of the biblical stories and all along those lines. And I'm not necessarily doing anything that would contribute to that because I know that I eat out way too much and eat way too much fast food. I know that I don't exercise nearly enough, and I have some other habits that probably are not the greatest in that sense. Not a drinker or a smoker, so that goes in my benefit. I mean, I might drink casually, but not in the sense of abusing it and all in that way. And I've never been a smoker, but there are things that go on in that space. And even when I'm trying to think who it was. I think it was Willard Scott and some of the other weathermen, and they would interview people that had made it to the Centurion Club or the Centurion and beyond. And a lot of times they would say things, and you'd go like, "Wait a minute, that's not exactly what is supposed to be the key to success." Because they tell you how they had drunk, a fifth of gin and how they had been involved sexually well until their 90s and the hundreds and all these other things that people would be like, that's supposed to cut down on your life expectancy, not increase it. But hey, they worked for them. So I just wondered, at what point did you realize that this is a field of study that you were interested in?
So I think you're right. I think people are very, very reticent about talking about their mortality. It's very scary, right? It is. I mean, if you think about it, just the thought, like I know when I think about it, the first thing that comes to my mind is my kids,
Mhm.
right? Because I have 4 kids, age 23 to 15. And just the thought of not being here for them is really scary. And I even kind of have feelings in my body when I talk about it because it's so, uncomfortable. However, when you're in a situation, unfortunately, where there's illness or whatever the case is, right? Some people, again, it depends on the person in terms of what they're readily able to accept. I think for myself, and people say this to me, they literally say, "Oh, how could you do that? It's so morbid." And no, I have to tell you, sitting with people where they're able to share a part of themselves and really speak to like intricate details of their life and their love and their connections and what's meaningful to them is the most powerful, incredible experience. I always walk away learning something literally about myself, about the other person, about life, about what's meaningful and important. And if anything, it also allows me to tap into my gratitude. So, if somebody said to me, and people sometimes do, if I died tomorrow, and I really mean this, if I died tomorrow, I would die with a smile on my face. And I really mean that because I really feel that I live every single life, every single day. I mean,
Mhm.
um, again, to its utmost. I really try to practice what I preach, and I, practice mindfulness and meditative practice. I really take my relationships extremely seriously. I try to be my best self every moment. Again, I'm a human being. I falter. I'm not always my best self, right? Sometimes I lose my temper, whatever the case is. Um, but I don't beat myself up for it because I accept my humanity and I provide myself with self compassion and I strive to be better the next day.
Yeah.
So every day is a new experience. Every day is a new journey. And I really kind of see it that way. And a lot of my book, where I talk about acceptance, compassion, and empowerment is really about that. Is
Yeah.
how do we live each life meaningfully so that if we really died tomorrow, that we would actually feel a sense of contentment and fulfillment. Not everyone could say that. Not everyone could say that. We're kind of live in Western society where we're striving and striving and striving and we don't take moments to even appreciate where we've been and where we're at and where we're going. Even yesterday I was with a patient and I mean when I started working with her, she wanted to go to law school. That was her dream.
Mhm.
And I've been through the journey with her, when she was in college and now she's in law school. And she's actually almost finished with her first year of law school.
Okay.
And she was talking about it and her experience. And I said to her, let's just take a moment. Let's just stop right now, take a moment and think about where you're at. Oh my goodness. Like I know you way back when you had all these goals and like you're almost finished with your first year of law school. Like you're on your way. And she started, tears came like rolling down her eyes. Because she said to me, oh, I don't even think about it. Like life just zooms by and I'm so preoccupied with studying and my academics and etc. Like I don't even take a moment to think about like where I've come to. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Isn't that part of the problem? Because I know even in my own life, and I've talked about this on other editions of the online dinner party, it's a topic that I love talking about and hearing answers to people, but and how they deal with it. But in a lot of ways, aren't we victims in a lot of times of limiting beliefs and limiting and not believing that we are as capable as we think we are? Yeah, even if I'm using your lawyer friend's analogy and even some of the ways that you're saying of what you did and everything. But I know a number of people that even listen to this show and are part of the network and are even part of folks that regularly watch. We oftentimes talk not just on my show, but other shows as
Yeah.
well as about the imposter syndrome. And I know that I've been guilty of that. There have been, and I don't have any kids, but I do have my two nephews, and I'm still in that single space in the early 60s and everything. So definitely, whether it is relationships or whether it is jobs, I know that I've had that internal conversation with myself, and I have talked myself out of some probably pleasant situations, both in terms of relationships and also in terms of jobs. Because I'll go to the job case. It's like, yeah, I should go for that job. I should go for that job. I should go for that job. So you keep talking to yourself about why you should or why you shouldn't go for the job. And by the time you finally get the guts to go ask the people if the job is available, they're like, no, we already hired so and so. So you've already talked yourself out of it and all along those lines. So how much
Yeah.
is that a problem and how do we conquer that? Because I do think a lot of people are
Yes.
fearful of
So
that.
that is actually a whole chapter in my book about our thinking and
Mhm.
and how it could either encourage us or discourage us.
Right.
So it really has to do, and people don't really understand this, it has to do with our physiology. It has to do with our neurocognition. It has to do with so many different factors. It has to do with our experience. It has to do with our memory. It has to do with, our families of origin. And I could go on and on and on and on, and our genetics and how we're wired and etc. So, our minds are wired um, to basically protect us from danger and discomfort.
Right.
And that's its primary job. And it does it in a way that can be and tends to be at times very counterproductive. So it's sometimes incessant, and we try to avoid it and distract from it, right? And talk ourselves out of things. It doesn't work that way as much as we'd like to think that we can. It's so interesting. I just wrote a blog on confidence.
Mhm.
And in 2 days it got like 10,000 reads. So my point is like people don't realize how confidence building, and mindset, and so many other things affect the way we approach our world, you know? So we're often flooded with very worried thoughts and very negative thoughts and very self-defeating thoughts and having an inner critic, etc., because our mind is trying to help us. It's not trying to harm us. So, like, an example is if you didn't have, let's say, worry about doing well on a test,
Mhm.
okay, or a presentation or whatever it is that you're doing,
Right.
you probably wouldn't care. And you'd be like, oh, I don't need to prepare for this, whatever, right? You just kind of with it. Yeah. We need it. It helps us. Okay. But sometimes right, we overthink or we
Mhm.
over worry or whatever you want to call it. And then guess what? It takes away from our ability to perform because it affects our concentration. It affects our focusing. It affects our ability to be present. And I could go on and on.
But isn't the flip side of that sometimes because I'll come back to the relationship side of things, that sometimes we don't listen to the things that have gone on? Because I know that there have been cases even in my own life where there have been certain types that I have been attracted to, and they are not necessarily always the most healthy types for me,
Uh-huh.
and every long thing along those lines. So sometimes you find yourself repeating bad habits, even though your brain is telling you that that is not a good thing to be involved in that sense of the
So,
relationship. But you're like trying to talk yourself into it versus talking yourself out of it.
well, so there's another factor there though that you have to mention. So like in relationships, particularly with intimate relationships,
Mhm.
it's not only your brain saying this is not good for me, right? Because I've been down this road before.
Right.
It's your nervous system.
Mhm.
And we don't take that into account. So like let's say we've been in a life where we're always, let's say, in protective mode
Right.
because of whatever. Or let's say, right, so that the dopamine, the neurotransmitters in our body loves the excitement and the drama and the whatever is going on. We're drawn to it. And it's a habit. It becomes a habit, but it's not only a habit, it's a mapping in our bodies. Okay. So our neural networks get affected by that.
Mhm.
And it's a repetition compulsion. We always want to return back to that because it feels good. If it does actually feel good because you feel strong and you feel excited and you feel whatever, right? Elated. That's what's also not good for you. But
Right.
if you don't take both of those things into account, we're likely to repeat the behavior. I do a lot of different like exercises with my students, when I teach at NYU, but one example is, again, even like a lawn, right? The tendency, if you have people crossing a lawn, they're going to follow the path where there's like an indent.
Right.
And eventually what happens is there's no grass there, right? It just becomes a
Mhm.
path.
Right.
Well, if you want to grow the grass back, you have to plant seeds and you have to like stay off the grass and you have to water it and make sure it gets sunlight and whatever else, right? It's a process. That's a whole transformation. The same thing with our brain. If our brain is, again, all the neural networks and the memories are integrated, literally integrated into our synapses, it takes a lot to change that. It doesn't just happen just because oh, I need to have healthy relationships. It doesn't work that way. Our bodies, our nervous system is still going to yearn and crave for that excitement and that drama and whatever. And when we don't have it, and people tell me this all the time, it's boring. There's no excitement.
Yeah, essentially, that conversation goes on. It's not as exciting, even though the excitement can be short-lived and can be overly dramatic, and the excitement can also be a negative if it is turned in the wrong direction. I know that you gave a lecture, and you kind of alluded to it in this conversation and everything, but it was a TEDx talk, and I think a lot of people in society are masters. I know I'm a master at it sometimes, and sometimes it's not something I am proud of, but definitely. And we have a show called Unbreakable Souls, which is definitely minority men, African American men to be exact, talking to each other and everything. And I do know that sometimes in certain cultures it is even more accepted
Yeah.
than others. But I just wondered if you could speak to this notion of emotional avoidance, because I do know that sometimes we don't want to get as
Yeah.
attached because we're afraid of what the attachment could lead to and afraid that it might cause some pain and other things along those lines. So a lot of times we will avoid what we feel can cause pain and all in that space. And that to me is I guess, an example of emotional avoidance.
Yeah. So emotional avoidance, and my TED talk is called Circumventing Emotional Avoidance. So again, because of the way our brains are wired, like I explained before, we tend to have all of these, mind games, in order to avoid, again, this discomfort. And we avoid, we distract, right? We talk ourselves out of. I mean, we do all these like kind of mind games. It doesn't work though. It doesn't work. So if I tell you to forget something or not think about something, guess what? You're going to be thinking about it, and then you're going to be having feelings about thinking about it. And then you're going to beat yourself up for why you can't get it out of your mind. I mean, that's just kind of the looping that we do. It's like literally this looping. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You put yourself in this position of stuckness because of the avoidance. So the point is, what's the utility? What's the benefit of actually leaning into it? The benefit is our discomfort and of our negative emotions or kind of the space we're in teaches us. That is our teacher. That is our guide. And it lets us know what's important. We need that. We actually need to be sitting with, this morning I had a moment, and I'm going to tell you, it was very powerful for me. But I was feeling a little down. I don't know. I was just kind of feeling like blah, and I'm like, what's going on with me? Like, what? I couldn't. So I was thinking, like, what do I need? And I kind of came up with these words I needed to hear, right? And then when I kind of closed my eyes and I said those words to myself, and I started crying, and I felt really deeply emotional. And one part of me was like, oh my God, that's my inner child. That is so my inner child. I realized it. I'm like, that's what my little self needed to hear. I'm an adult, it would be nice to hear it, but I'm okay, even if I don't hear it, because I know who I am and I feel grounded in the person I am and the relationships I've cultivated and the direction I'm going to in my life. And I had to like sit there, right, and like feel the feelings, the pain of my inner child. And I took the opportunity to feel those feelings. So that's the opposite of avoidance. That's like really leaning into. Now, why was that helpful and useful? Number one, I got to give some self-compassion to myself in the here and now. I was able to give compassion to my inner child that needs it, and I was able to think about what direction I want to go, and yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that on the flip side of that, and I know that it happens in certain relationships, and I've definitely had friends that have gone through this, whether they were in my life directly or whether they were friends that I have just counseled or talked to, and everything is this notion of coming to terms with the bad things that have happened in our life. Because I do know that there have been some people that have, for lack of a better term, and I know that even the president talked about it in his State of the Union yesterday when he was bringing up domestic violence, that they have gone through domestic violence situations and versus coping with it or dealing with it and kind of like coming to terms with what they went through, that there have been cases, because I know I've had relationships with some people that they kind of reverse it and put it on the other person that they are getting involved in and all in that space. So I just wonder if you could speak to that, because I do know that sometimes there's this kind of there's a word for it. I think it's called transference. So they're transferring what they should have been dealing with onto the next situation.
Yeah. So which part of it do you want me to address? Because there's a lot there.
Well, we can start with the transference, and then we can go to any of the other
Well,
parts that you want to address.
talking about a projection,
Yes.
probably more. You transfer, yes, the kind of, but it's a projection. Some people are projections. And a lot of, some people, again, when we're in relationships, particularly, there's something called like an imago match. We tend to kind of partner up and connect with people, I guess, in more intimate relationships with people with similar traits to our parents, or relationships that we need to have corrective experiences, in a sense, to make the corrective experience with the person. But guess what? It doesn't always work that way, because sometimes it's just a replication. In other words, if your parent wasn't necessarily emotionally connected, and didn't give you, let's say, the emotionality in the way that you need to, they were neglectful in that way, you'll tend again, and it's our subconscious and our unconscious's way of working through its woundedness. So it will partner or try to partner up with somebody who is also emotionally neglectful so that it could have a corrective experience. Unfortunately, somebody who tends to be emotionally neglectful, unless they've done serious personal work, they're just going to be in their wounds.
Right.
And it's going to, in some ways, re-traumatize you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what we tend to do. We always try through our subconscious wounds, we try to work through our relationships in order to make change, but it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
And unless you're very cognizant of that, it could actually be very therapeutic too. So if you have somebody who has the tendency to be emotionally neglectful, however, they have the ability to connect with you and to nurture you, that could actually be very therapeutic. You could be therapeutic to them, they could be therapeutic to you. But again, you have to be really cognizant and really emotionally in tune for that to happen.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I could speak for myself too. I could tell you that I've cultivated relationships, of course, my adult years, and I do a lot of personal work, of course, where, I think in the past, my relationships were more, if I had a feeling or a disappointment or something, I would express it. And then the other person would get angry at me for having the reaction or would be angry at me for having the feeling. And then what that would do to me is I would get dysregulated because all I want is to be heard and accepted and understood and attuned to. And I would get the opposite. And guess what? That's a replication of my parents.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, completely. And I would get frustrated and dysregulated and etc. And now it's so interesting. Like I'm so aware because of the work that I've done that I'm so aware of actually connecting with people who don't have necessarily the attachment issues that I have.
Mhm.
So the same things don't happen for them or come up where they could actually hear me without getting defensive and protective. They could actually kind of be open and have space for my feelings, right? And I could have open space for their feelings. And it's healthier, it's more interactive, it's more nurturing, it's more expressive. And my relationships have then changed so drastically because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've been fascinated just because I've watched the society over these 60 years of 61 years, about to be 62 of existence. And definitely, one of the things that people talk about often, I'm sure you even study it in your work at NYU, is the rate of divorce that is going on in our country and all along those lines. And with that rate of divorce, it is made for some interested blended families. I know that my brother's current relationship, and that he's on his next engagement. He's been married twice, and is now engaged in some long-term engagement. They have some health issues, so eventually they may get married. And I think this will be the final one because they get along quite well. But he has got my two nephews, and she's got two kids of her own, so they are very much of a blended family. And then I've got friends that have been divorced. Sometimes they have kids, and in some cases, the grandkids, and they are trying to navigate that dating land field because they definitely want relationships, but then they are afraid of what point to introduce the family. Because I know I even had a cousin that is in a successful marriage, and they've been very successful for a number of years. But when he first brought his wife to the parents, they were definitely giving him a hard time because she already had an existing family and an existing grandfamily because she already had grandkids at that particular time and everything. So I just wonder, what kind of advice do you give to folks as we are seeing this more and more common in society, where folks are trying to figure out how to cope with these new dynamics? And they might have existed in the 30s and the 40s, but I don't think that they were as prominent during that time frame, the 30s and 40s.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's an issue. I think as long as everybody is respectful of one another and that there's I guess, yeah, just mutual respect,
Right.
for each other's needs and communication. I mean, I think that's like ultimately the most important thing, that everybody's open and communicating and expressive, right? Setting boundaries, all those kind of interpersonal relationship skills that we lose sight of sometimes. But I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to be an issue. I think, I think dynamics like that have been around forever. um, but I think it could be problematic if you're not, again, attuned.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely have to be attuned. I know one of the things I mentioned to you when I was writing to you and saying I would love to have you as a guest, and you've been amazing so far. And I look forward to even more of this conversation. Is this notion, because I sometimes, even though I use the term, I sometimes don't like the term and everything. And I mentioned to you that my brother works with what some people call at-risk youth and all along those lines. And I sometimes think that that is one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, because if you're telling the kid that he's at risk, then he might already do even more things to become at risk if you are creating that kind of narrative. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that, because like I said, and I mentioned to you that the fact that my brother had been involved in that work, and I definitely know he's done some great work with some kids that might have even
Yeah.
been involved in gangs and gang activity. But sometimes I think we put them in a bad situation because we're trying to label them in a way that they may not need to be labeled.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I agree. Labels are not a good thing in general, whether it's mental health related or, characteristic of somebody or a diagnosis, right? Like we label all the time. We do. So I agree. I mean, I think that it's best to talk about the individual, not talking about their problem or right challenge that you find. But I also think that, we have to think about how we're acculturating youth.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we have to think about supports and we have to think about resources. And unfortunately, kids are not taught they're taught academics in school, but they're not taught about social skills and they're not taught about daily life activities and they're not taught about social emotional skills. And I could go on, which I have a major, major issue. We could talk about this all day. Life skills is just as important as academics, even more so.
No, I think,
um,
and that's one of the things that even the network founders have talked about, because they are big proponents of fiscal
yeah,
literacy. They're big proponents of life skills, and they are, again, I kind of agree with them that there was a time for those of us that went to grade school in the 70s and even in the 80s and 90s and maybe even in the 2000s, where some of these skills were being taught, and you were kind of like getting some of that uh, life skills in the playground, because the teachers might have been a little bit more supervisory in some of those earlier years of the teaching and everything. And not to knock teachers, I have teachers in my family, but I do think, and have teachers that are among my friends, but I do think that they are sometimes overly swamped and aren't able to do as much as what some of the older teachers used to do and everything, in the sense of being able to teach some of those life skills.
yeah, yeah. And it's really unfortunate because what we're seeing, unfortunately, not only with youth, with adults across the board, is we don't see people really who are able to kind of cope,
Mm-hmm.
cope with adversity, cope with, negative and uncomfortable emotions, cope with, there's so many things we have to cope with because life is so uncertain
Right.
and life is so precarious. Things change on a dime. Regulating our emotions. I mean, part of the issue why we have a lot of aggression is because people can't really modulate their rage and their anger, right? We don't teach about problem solving skills. I mean, again, we could sit here all day talking about this and I have a lot of feelings about it.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. It's a great conversation point, because even one of the things I was going to say is that we saw that to some degree, no matter what side of the political
yeah,
aisle you are on, because there have been folks that one of the criticisms that people gave of Biden's State of the Union was that they felt that he was yelling at the members of Congress, and definitely there was folks that felt that Marjorie Taylor Greene was doing the same to him, and I've heard that from the Trump camp and other camps as well, that people feel that he is yelling at folks. So sometimes our leaders, and it's not just the political leaders, I can also see it in some of the things that I see from entertainers and others as well. So maybe we've gotten to this
oh,
notion where yelling is the norm.
I mean,
I'm sorry, say what?
what about Will Smith?
Yes, exactly.
I could go on and on. There's, it's out there,
Yeah.
right?
And
P. Diddy. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of examples of it, and these are people like, again, in the public who are supposed to be role models for our kids. So, there's a lot of issues. And we have to also think about why are we prioritizing academics over social emotional skills?
Right.
What message is that sending also? How are we acculturating our kids? What messages are we sending to them about what's important or what's going to help them in life? I had actually, I'll give you this example because it was such a great one. The day before yesterday, my daughter called me and she was frantic. She was like crying, and she's 15. So that she's sitting and studying for her test, but she can't make sense of it. Like it's math, right? Go figure. She can't make sense of it. She's so distressed, etc. And then as I'm talking to her, I said to her, like, didn't you sit and speak to the teacher? Because I knew she met with the teacher, and she said, yes. When I sat with the teacher and we went over all the material, I understood it. But now I'm so anxious that it's out of my mind. I can't remember anything. I'm sitting here. And I said, okay, let's take a moment. Let's recalibrate. Let's take a deep breath. Like, how are you going to handle this? How are we going to handle this? Right. So I said, how do you think? What do you think your options are? Okay. I didn't give her the answer. I said, what do you think your options are? So she kind of laid them out. And I said, yeah, those are some options, and then she said, yeah, and I have to go to a basketball game tonight because there's the playoffs for my school. And this hasn't happened in so long. And I said, you have a test tomorrow. You're sitting here and telling me that you can't make sense out of what's the difference? Even if I sit here, it's not going to make a difference because I don't understand it. I said, well, maybe you could think about a way that you could possibly get help, even though it's at the last minute, where you may be able to understand it. Yeah. And do you think going to the basketball game is going to really get you to where you want to go? Like, I mean, that's up to you, right? Because that's your responsibility. Right. So I said, why don't you think about it and we'll talk in a little bit and, tell me what you came up with. She calls me back and she says to me that her and her friend are going to go to her friend's house. They're both not going to go to the basketball game. And her friend is going to try to teach her the material. Mm-hmm. And I was so delighted. I said to her, you know what? Wow. What a good choice. Like what? First of all, the fact that you thought it through, the fact that you reached out to a friend for support, the fact that you're making this amazing decision for yourself. And I know that you really want to go to the basketball game. And I know she's very social. I know you want to be there for the team and you want to like be with your friends. Everybody's going, but you're making a choice that this is going to leaning into your confidence. And it could be something, right, that could reinforce how important it is that when you put time and effort into something, you could reap the rewards. I said, what a good experiment. Let's experiment and see what happens. Anyway, she goes to her friend and I said, what a good friend you must be. For your friend to give up going to the game. Wow. Like you must be such a good friend that your friend is willing to do that for you. I'm amazed. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that makes a great example. And it was making that priority decision.
Yeah, fast forward, she calls me so excited, like over the moon. I know everything. She explained it to me. I understand it. Like, oh my God. She was like so excited. I said, you know what? Wow. Guess what? She calls me the next day and she said, I got an 80 something, but I know I'm supposed to get higher because the teacher didn't mark a couple things right. I'm going to go and advocate for myself. And she comes back and she shows me like, because they do it online or whatever. She got a 94 and her friend got a 97. And I said to her, I go, wow. And she's so, anyway, by the way, I'm taking them out tonight, both of them.
Giving them a good reward.
I said to both of them, if you both do well, I'm gonna, we'll do something nice. So I'm actually taking them out for dinner. And I also, when I went over to the friend's house, I went to CVS and I got a whole bunch of cute little things. And I said to her, I said, you are the most incredible friend. And I want to thank you for me and from her, because you, like, what you just did was so kind and so generous. And I think you deserve to be acknowledged. And she was like, oh, thank you so much. She was so excited. Anyway, all around, what an incredible lesson for everybody, right?
Yeah, that's a great lesson for everybody. But on the flip side of that, one of the things that I know you also talk about, because you kind of alluded to it, and I know that kids and adults are notorious for this. Sometimes we are in such deep pain or whatever that we're going through that we try to find a substitute, and one of those substitutes can be food, because I do know that there's a
Yeah.
epidemic, speaking of epidemics, of obesity and overeating and all along those lines. And I do know that sometimes we're not even hungry, we're just trying to use food as a comfort tool. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that, because I do know that that is a problem that exists, and it sounds like that's one of the topics that you have talked about in one of your books as well, particularly with our kids. But I think us adults are just as guilty
Yeah.
in some situations as well. But just
Well,
was
I think food is one, is one, I guess, way that we kind of distract, from our emotions. And again, it could be a habit. Again, it could be emotional eating. I mean, there's a variety of different reasons, but again, it's our coping skills. It comes down to our coping skills. We do all different kinds of things, right? Whether it's overeat, drinking, smoking, you know, overproducing, right? Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that we avoid, I would say,
right.
and we have all these different coping mechanisms, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are very negative and maladaptive. So they do not increase our confidence. They do not lean into being our best self. They do not lean into living the best life that we want to live. And they're counterproductive. And they also really impede on our confidence. So the less confident we are, the less likely we are in terms of our motivation to achieve, in terms of putting things and effort and energy into things that, again, compel us and motivate us. So all in all, we have to kind of understand what it is and how we cope so that we use more productive ways of coping, whether it's, again, from extreme emotion or intense emotion, whether it's discomfort, whether it's adversity, etc. So this morning when I was really sad, like I told you, I could have, maybe done something negative, right, to appease myself. And I decided not to. I decided to sit with the feelings. And it was very painful. I was crying. I mean, it was very painful. I had to sit with it, and I had to acknowledge my pain in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that same space, because one of the things we talk about quite often on the network as well as online dinner party and everything is this notion that you've kind of talked about even with your 4 kids and some of the other things that you have mentioned. But you mentioned all these different enterprises that you are part of, and definitely glad that you're part of Red Cross and the your own organization, this nonprofit that you're trying to put together, as well as your work at NYU and raising these 4 kids that are now at least 1 or 2 in the adult space and everything in that way. But how did you manage that work-life balance? Because that's something we oftentimes talk about. I know that I have multiple jobs and I'm not the best person with the work-life balance, because sometimes I spend too much time with the work and not getting enough into the fun activities. But I was just wondering, how do you manage that work-life balance?
Yeah. So I'm going to have to get off in a couple minutes,
No
just
problem.
giving you the heads up, but I will answer your question. So there is no work-life balance. There's no such a thing. So I do want to say that, because I think that is a way that we really kind of shoot ourselves in the foot. And I think when we quantify things, we end up judging ourselves.
Right.
Okay? Nothing could be perfect. Like if I have responsibilities with my kids and being a mother, and I have responsibilities with my work, it's never going to be 50-50, nor should it be.
Right.
So I have to decide from moment to moment what I make priority.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I X out or rule out the other value or something that's really important to me. I just know in that moment, I need to give more priority to one over the other. So we perpetually are in a state of regret and guilt when we have these expectations for ourselves. So it's not about balance. It's about, what do I need to give priority to in a given moment or circumstance?
Yeah.
And I think that there are times, right, where you can make a decision and decide that you have to focus more, on one thing over the other. And instead of saying like, oh, I'm such a horrible mother, how did I not, whatever, you could say to yourself, that was a really hard decision for me to make, because I am such a wonderful mother. And I really want to pay attention to both right now, but I can't. because I'm not an octopus, right? So I am going to make the decision at this moment to prioritize my work because I have to. And I'm going to let my kid know how much I love them and how much I want to be with them. And I'm going to do whatever I can to still make sure I attune to their feelings and thoughts, right? And I'm going to be cognizant of how hard this is for me to make this decision because I love my child so much.
Yeah, that makes a
Right?
lot of sense and everything. I can
Yeah.
definitely see that. I know you got to get ready to get off of it. There's something I get all my guests to answer. I hope you can answer this before we end this show. And I definitely hope that you'll make a return trip. I know we did this special edition and everything on today because of your schedule, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and have enjoyed meeting you and getting a chance to know more about all the great things that you are doing and all along those lines and anything that we can do to help even get the nonprofit off the ground. Because like I mentioned to you before, my mother was actually the founding member of the first president of the Golden Leaf Foundation, which is the tobacco settlement money out in North Carolina. So she is years retired and all along those lines.
I am fully open, literally. I have such a passion for the work that I do, and I know its effectiveness, and I know how it could change also people's lives, and also just, like I said, palliative care, like, you know. So whoever wants to be helpful or contribute in any way, and any contacts would be so greatly appreciated. It's really, really meaningful work. Yeah.
Definitely meaningful. The things I get everybody to answer, and that's what I was going to get you to give, is if you can give your contact information. And like I said, this is definitely a show of positivity. That's one of the things that I kind of take as my own personal message of spreading messages of positivity. So I give the opportunity for all of my guests to give a message of positivity to our global community because it is a global network. So I get all my guests to give a message of positivity to our global audience. So I will give you that opportunity as well.
Thank you. So the best way to reach me is on my website, which is www, my full name, MichelleMaidenberg.com, which is Michelle with 2 L's. And it's MaidenBerg, Maidenberg, Fairy Maiden, Berg. It has my blogs. It has my book information. It has everything. And, you know, feel free to, again, subscribe to my Psychology Today blog. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and get guided meditations every Thursday morning. But I'm always happy to be helpful. And again, I just want everyone to live their best life. We have a short life. It goes by like this. And we only have one chance to do this. One chance. Yeah.
That is a very positive message, and definitely we need to have more people realizing that and everything. I can say that as the person that they pretty much made the programming person here, that if it's okay with you, I might grab some of those YouTube clips and we may actually put them on the network because we love spreading the message any way that folks are willing to have them spread. So if I've got your permission, I would definitely grab them and definitely share them with others as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I know you've got to run and get off to your next appointment, but I have thoroughly enjoyed us having this time to talk. And like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed meeting you and definitely learning a lot about you as well. And I thoroughly thought that this was a great conversation that needed to be had. And speaking of overeating, I think I'm going to end with this vegan commercial because some friends might have a vegan snack that they provide and all along those lines here in Raleigh. So I think that's the PSA that I'll use to get us on out of here. But definitely I appreciate you being on, and I will see you on another time, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good one. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.